2022. So we've been praying, checking the news, just keeping up on things, but unable to do anything physically about it, but praying. And that's what God uses to change things. So one night, about 2 months ago now, I was praying quite a bit after some news had hit, and I spent a few hours in prayer, and God put it on my heart that I have the ability to fix and build things, and that building is something that I could go do there. And I had some changes in my life at that time that allowed me a little more flexibility in my schedule. So as I was praying about it, I got the sense there's time to find out how to go and get there, and I thought about it and prayed and decided I could work through local churches to help fix up some of the damage and take care of people's homes or whatever the needs were. So I started reaching out for connections, anyone who knew anyone who was in Ukraine or had a friend that was associated with any church in Ukraine. And once you start asking, they're out there. I think I ended up with 8 different leads I was following up. I was also looking at NGOs as well that were working there. And then I whittled it down to a couple. And one of those was a friend of a friend from my sister-in-law's church, who had been going there to a number of churches and building some cabins at a retreat center for a church and so forth. And another was actually through my life insurance agent. I didn't have a life insurance agent. I thought maybe I should have life insurance before I go to Ukraine. So I started looking it up. It's moot. You can't get life insurance if you're going to travel internationally, especially to dangerous areas. And it doesn't cover you if you get in any kind of act of war anyway. But the life insurance guy said, hey, I've got some great friends in Ukraine. I said, well, send me their email. So I reached out to them, and that became my second stop in Lviv, and the first stop in the Lutsk, Kovel, Novolysk area. So that's my part of the story. Okay, I'm just going to cover a little bit of history about Ukraine because I think it's actually important in the context to understand what we're getting into. Of course, I'm sharing it with you. History is never objective, it is subjective, so this is going to be, things I choose to highlight or something, but I hope we can get some sense out of this. So kind of like the land of Israel was always a crossroads and a bit of a punching bag for the great empires of that time, stuck between Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and so forth. Ukraine was always the middle ground, and it was owned by a lot of different people at a lot of different times, and it was highly desirable. Had the most fertile land outside of North America really in the world. Large tracts of huge flat black earth. And for that reason, it was hard for anyone to hold it, and it tended to move back and forth between people a lot. The modern Slavic peoples began as the Kiev Rus, 9th to 11th century. The Mongols showed up, and after the Mongols disintegrated, it was fought over by the Poles, Lithuanians, and Ottoman empires. So it kind of changed hands a lot, as I said. It identified itself, the same people as the Rus, as the Cossacks in the 17th century, after which it was fought over by the Polish, Russians, Austrians. Someone would conquer it, someone else would conquer it. They'd make a deal. The Slavic Cossack people would make a deal with one side, and then the other side would get too powerful, then make a deal with them. And they kind of just went back and forth a lot. And I think that's an important theme because, in a sense, we're still seeing that now. One of the books I read was called The Gateway to Europe, and it is sort of the bridge between East and West. So when I say between East and West, back then it wasn't political, it was about religion. The question was, did they answer to the Orthodox Patriarch or did they answer to the Catholic Pope? And this poor nation switched a bunch of times and even ended up with some Catholic Orthodox who were Orthodox but they answered to the Pope. That's confusing. Then Russia took over a good chunk of them and left a wonderful famine in 1922 on purpose to get rid of to reduce the population and get rid of the kind of people they didn't want. Then they survived a couple of occupations by Germany and then Soviet Russia after that in World War II and voted for their independence in 91. So we'll just let that go there. Here's my trip. You go from, and that stuff will become relevant later. You go from Detroit basically to Warsaw and Warsaw to Poland. Well, Detroit to Amsterdam to Warsaw, and then you land. And then you take a long bus, like 30 hours trip all told, another 12 hours in a bus to get there. So the weather is very similar to what we have. It was snowing when I got there. It was snowing when I left. We weren't happy about it. They weren't happy about it either. It was like the same thing. there's a lot of materials and aid moving in from Europe into Ukraine. So this was the Polish-Ukrainian border, and there were semis with fuel, food, all kinds of goods, probably munitions, just lots of stuff moving in through Poland. Fortunately, the coach bus got to skip that line and get its own lane. It was very easy to get into Poland and into Ukraine, a little harder to get out of it. So in terms of all the border guards and so forth. They saw my American passport. They said, come on in. On the way back out, they really wanted to make sure I wasn't bringing anything in particular, I think weapons, back out of Ukraine for resale. So they were quite thorough about checking things out in the Polish border. So the first half of my trip was at these 3 churches in the cities of Koval, Novolinsk, and Lutsk. And I just want to talk a little bit about the churches. And before I go into the details of my part of the trip, of the conversations I had with the church leaders, the questions they asked me about what was happening and what they had been through. Now, under Soviet rule from 20 to 90, they basically, especially World War II to 90, the Soviets were engaged in a lot of military conflicts, and they needed soldiers. And it did not really seem like a good idea for people to be sending their boys off to go fight for Soviet Russia's imperialist attitudes, like wars in Afghanistan and on the western border over by Germany. And so they were mostly pacifist churches and had been that way for quite a while. They said, war is not right. It's not ever right. Now, after they gained independence and saw the Crimean and then the Donbass and now the full invasion of the eastern side, they had to rethink that a little. And so a lot of the churches I had talked to said, what do you feel about pacifism? What do you feel about just war? And they had wrestled through that recently. And many of them had come down supporting traditional Augustinian just war perspective. But they were very kind about it, and they had not turned their backs on the brethren who were still pacifist. That was a big deal, a big conversation that had been had in the last decade or so in these churches. Now, as I was saying, the border between East and West. Now, right now, the East is a very nominal Russian Orthodox church that Russia tried to implant into Ukraine and pushed it into there as a tool of political power. And it had very little to do with what you and I would call faith. There are Orthodox churches out there that show some faith. The Russian Orthodox Church is probably not at the top of that list as I have read it and understand it. It is a pretty secular organization in many ways, and most of the people who registered in it do not attend. Something like 70% of people in Ukraine were connected with the Russian Orthodox Church loosely in name, but attendance might have been like 3% or something. I don't know. It's very low. There were a lot of very fancy gilded buildings, though, that I saw. So Ukraine is sitting here balanced between Europe and Russia, and they've got the Russian Orthodox Church on one side. On the other side, they've got a post-Christian Europe. And it is, I've been to England. We've all read about Europe. Since World War II, they've become steadily more atheistic. And so they're looking one way, and they're looking the other way. And they could pick either one of those. And they're kind of shifting from the Orthodox to the atheism. And it's not a win either way. But in the middle of this fight, in the middle of this war, I think God, the churches I talked to believed that God was using this to open doors and open eyes. And the church was doing great work, which we're going to talk about later. They were doing great work mostly with refugees. The churches were experiencing growth among the older refugees, among the youth as well, people looking for a why to the world. When there's death and war, people are always looking for a why. And so the churches were experiencing this growth. Most of them were Baptist, the ones I interacted with. I don't think there were a lot of other Protestant churches active there, besides a large group of Baptists. If there were, I'll try to learn about them next time, but I couldn't find them in the statistics or in person. And then the government also, balance between those two, the government had decided that it was not opposed to and maybe was even supportive of a Protestant Christianity in the country. And while I was there, one of the churches, the pastors showed a little award he had gotten from the town for helping with refugees. Now, it didn't mean much to him, except that they were very grateful that they were being recognized and that they were being allowed to worship and allowed to proselytize and even encouraged. The government had given them full access to the front lines. They were doing volunteer work, bringing food and Bibles to the Ukrainian soldiers, and talking with them and praying with them if possible. So that's a big stretch compared to what the Orthodox Church would have allowed, or even what might be allowed under a NATO, French, where you might have an ordained chaplain, but you wouldn't be letting local churches just hit the front line with gifts and supplies. So, between the two, maybe something good is happening. That's what the local pastors believed. So here's my time. I got dropped off late at night, and this guy picked me up, shared his story. It was a pretty typical story. His wife and kids had left the country. He was here because you can't leave if you're a male of selective service age, which goes up to 65 or goes up to 60 or something there. It's like 25 to 60, which is interesting. When you think of, say, the American Civil War, we were drafting people at 17, 18, up to 25. Here it's like 25 to 60, so they have a different age bracket for the draft. And about a quarter of eligible age men in the country are drafted. So that means there are still a lot of people not actively serving right now. But he hosted with me. We prayed, we sang, we didn't speak the same language. We sang a few of the same songs because there's a number of hymns like Amazing Grace or Whatever Friend We Have in Jesus or How Great Thou Art that were translated, and then we can both sing them together. So we sat around a piano and hung out while I tried to adjust to the 8-hour time change and ate lots of food. This is the first church I visited. All right, we're going to pause for a second. Any questions right now so far? No. All right, I'll just keep on chattering. So, this is a New Life Baptist Church. What you see behind you are Samaritan's Purse products. There was a lot of American goods that come in this country, and I did not personally see material shortages very much. I mean, it was not a wealthy country, not as wealthy as ours, but I didn't see anyone starving. A lot of food had come in. This relatively modest church, about our size perhaps, maybe 150 people, maybe a little bigger than ours, had helped 100,000 refugees in the last 3 years was their estimate. The Operation Christmas Child boxes that we package here, they had received those. They enjoyed them. They loved them. They didn't get them till Easter, and they handed them out at Easter. So there were some delays. So as well as food, there's also a lot of bedding up there. And, a lot of dry goods food. So they had beds all through the church. This is the church library. They just had beds because they never know when another bus would show up of people who just needed a place to stay. And it seems to be like a steady, it comes in spurts, but it's not like it's one and done. It seems every time there's another civilian assault on the eastern edge, a few more families go, I can't do this any longer, I'm leaving. And so fresh busloads come in right after attacks, it seems, quite often. That was Danique and Alexander. A lot of this was done with Google Translate. Translators were hard to come by, actually. That may have been less true a few, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But right now, there were very few people who spoke good English. And so I picked up my first 70 words in Ukrainian. I sat there on YouTube trying to learn as many as I could. And I carried on some conversations and even prayed for people a little bit. But Ukrainian is not easy to learn. This is kind of a touching story. This was the son of the pastor at the next church I was going to came to pick me up. He's Mark. I'm not going to give you his last name. He's not currently serving. He just turned 26, so he's just old enough too. But he has done a bunch of training with the military. But he volunteers. Now, at 26 years old, he's volunteering. He takes a refrigerated van to the front line, stacks it with bodies, and brings it home. And that was sort of the paradox. I didn't see any buildings destroyed where I was. There were checkpoints. There were tank spikes called hedgehogs on the sides of the road in case they were needed. There were a few checkpoints and stuff. But you didn't see destruction. You didn't see that. But at the same time, you have young men, volunteering by bringing back bodies. So those are all badges from the different regiments that he brought back bodies from. So they would always give him a badge. That was the headliner in his car, in the church van, was just full of those. This is what the countryside looks like. It's actually not so different from Michigan, not only climate-wise, but ecologically. As a farmer, I was very interested in what the trees were doing and what kind of brush they had and how it was growing. So I think we've got some potholes like. I just decided to grab a few from the side of the bus as I went. One thing that weirded me out ecologically that we don't have is right over here in the corner. You see this tree? Okay, those are little like parasites, like mistletoe, and they were quite common. Quite a few trees had them. Some trees had quite a few. They're bushes, 3 feet in diameter or something, and they're sitting there sucking the sap out of the tree, killing it. And they were all over the place. I didn't ever get used to that. So here's my trip. You fly into Warsaw. I came down, and then I visited these 3 churches here, Novolinsk, Koval, and Lutsk. And that was all arranged by the pastor in Lutsk, which Lutsk is a pretty good-sized city. And these are more like quite rural areas here. And then after that, I went to Lviv for the second half of my trip, which I'll show you about. It's actually not that long of a drive if you drive it, but the bus is a lot slower. Because sometimes it stops every half hour. Sometimes because people need to get off, and sometimes just because they want another smoke break. So it takes a while. So here in Novolinsk, they were also helping refugees. They had a warehouse beside the church. That was a pretty nice church as well. It's maybe similar to ours. And maybe a little more rustic in some ways, very old-fashioned inside, a lot of gilded stuff, and a smaller congregation. So maybe smaller than ours. But these are the refugees just getting bags of food and stuff. A bunch of the refugees stayed there and lived in a building they had beside there where I stayed for a couple days. And the ladies there were always cooking food for everyone, and they fed me well. They didn't speak my language, but they fed me well. In fact, they gave me a spot by myself with all the best desserts an hour before everyone else ate. Being an American, I objected to this 3 times, loudly. It didn't work. That lady was ready to beat me up. And I was like, all right, you know what, fine, I'll eat it. So I ate it. And then an hour later, I came back and ate with the rest. Anyway, so that was my best shot at egalitarianism, but you can only buck culture so hard sometimes. So they had me bring a message to these churches. Now, everyone wants, my perspective is usually I go places and I do things, tangible, physical things with my hands, and I bring good results and so forth. Some of the people who had urged me to go, who had encouraged me in this and were praying for me said, look, go listen. It's not about what you're going to get done. Just listen, pay attention. And this was pretty open-ended. So I went and I brought a message to the churches there. I decided I would just stand up and share at church because they asked me to, and I was interested. Now, they have long services. They go over 2 hours. They had one on Friday. They had one on Saturday. They had one on Sunday. And they have 3 to 4 sermons. But not just the pastor. The pastor would have one of those, maybe the longest one, but they'd have other men, elders, older men in the congregation would come up and share for adult men for 20 minutes or so on a passage or something. It wasn't quite expository, but it wasn't really topical either. It was somewhere in between. And between every sermon, they'd sing a couple more songs. So I got my space in there, and I shared from Revelations 3, verse 8, because I felt like the first couple churches were very small, and they were facing very large problems. And so I said, look, I know your deeds. I've placed before you an open door no one can shut. I know you have little strength, yet you have kept my word. You have not denied my name. Because those churches, in some ways, it seemed like they were tired. They were doing the right thing. They weren't giving up, but they were tired. And then I said I just wanted to share with you, this and that. And I shared a little story because I was asked about how I came and how I was motivated to come and the call and the prayer and so forth. The pastors asked me to share that. And then I said, I want you to know that you are not forgotten, that there are American Christians still praying for you. And they read the news as we do, and some days it can be quite discouraging and they can feel really abandoned. And I think that might be some of the most important things I did in my trip was in these multiple services, standing up and saying, you're not alone. People are praying for you. Some people in that church, there were a lot of older folks in some of these churches, were brought to tears just by that, just to know they're not forgotten. So at that same church, I got taken on to hand out some snack meals in bags and stuff I think from Samaritan's Purse as well. This is the pastor's wife, and this was a recovery hospital. It wasn't a nice hospital. In fact, they were restoring it as I was there. There were people working on it. But it was for people who had already been treated. And there were about, I don't know, maybe 70 military in there. The pastor's wife went through and gave them a hug and a handshake and took pictures with them and brought them all food and so forth. She did that every day. It was part of her ministry. I got an hour off. I was picked up by another guy heading to the next church, and he said, well, I got an hour before we actually meet them for dinner. What do you want to do? And I said, well, show me something historical. He says, well, there's a castle. I said, all right, take me to the castle. So we went in the castle. It was only a couple bucks to get in, and I got a few photos of it here. This is in Lutsk. It was a big castle. It did have some great features, and we got to climb some rickety things that would not be OSHA approved in this country, wooden odds and ends, and kind of rotten and crumbling. And it did see some action, so that was fun. We got to be there just as they closed, and right here there was a guy up here, actual person, wasn't recorded, came up with like a trumpet, and he played the Ukrainian national anthem at 5, and then gave the Ukrainian the motto like Slava Ukrainia, like Slava, strength to Ukraine, glory to Ukraine. So that was a cool experience to see that. Okay, on to the next church or building. So the church in Lutsk had co-sponsored with other churches and American money, I think, to build a medical center that they were using. And they had a number of people there. I think a lot of them had some mental disabilities as well as some older folk. The older people need is just huge there because there's so many refugees that get displaced, millions, literally millions. And the younger ones tend to leave the country. But the older ones, they have nowhere to go. So they just go east till they feel a little safer, and then they settle down. There's not really a pension system right now. There's not really a social security system right now. There was a little before the war, but it was only for federal employees anyway. So there's not a lot of government-based social service options for them. So the churches have to pick up the slack and provide medical care and places to stay for all these older folks. This was actually fairly empty when I got here. I'm not quite sure why, but it was state-of-the-art. It was nice. Another thing, as a builder, this interested me. They heat with wood. Huge buildings heated with wood. And that goes back to the history. Ukraine did have natural gas resources. They dried up back in the 70s. Soviets used them up and sold them to Europe, and now Ukraine doesn't have any. And now they have to buy their gas from Russia. And it's become a big leverage point over the last decades that Russia turns off the gas when they don't feel like they're getting what they want. So I think a lot of churches got sick of that, bigger buildings, and they just installed wood-fired systems so they're off-grid in terms of not getting shut off when the gas gets shut off. So they have huge boilers, like 2 or 3 of these in a room, and they'll have huge stacks of wood, and they'll have an old guy. Every church had an old guy, equivalent to the Dutch Kolster. He would be the caretaker. He would sweep the floors a little bit. He'd make sure all the doors were shut. He'd have a little dog following him around, and he would feed the fire around the clock. He would be there with a wheelbarrow, throwing more logs of wood in. I got to chat and visit with those guys quite a bit. They were quite friendly and had a lot of spare time when the pastors were rushing around, so I could sit and visit with the Kolsters, the caretakers. And that was pleasant. They understood. We understood each other. So this is Lutsk. This is a little fancier. This is a church of maybe more like 300 people, definitely a little wealthier, more modern style. And I stacked the pictures on top of each other, or else I think the narrower format rearranged them. Anyway, I spoke at this church as well, although it was a little more intimidating. It was a little fancier. But this one, they didn't seem like they had their backs against the wall as much. So I spoke from John 17 about Jesus' prayer for his disciples and then for the church, that they would be one as we are one. And while I was there were a few other Americans there as well. They were from a medical group that was doing amputations and prosthetics, volunteer. And so they got up and spoke as well. One amusing thing is that everyone there thought I was Ukrainian until I spoke. Even the Americans there didn't realize that I spoke English until I stood up and spoke. They were a little shocked. All the checkpoints I got through, nobody ever even, we got through a checkpoint and the guy who was driving got questioned about it, so I had to show his license. I'm in the passenger seat and they flagged me right by. I said, what's going on? He says, well, you look like you're Ukrainian. He says, in fact, you look like you probably serve in the military. So they just let me by. But anyway, visited with these people, prayed and talked with them, and the guy you can't see behind there is the one who orchestrated this trip here for me, Pablo Marunik. And I had he brought a translator along, which was really nice. So Okay. Oh, we got a couple of videos. So here's some a video. Do we need to press something to make it play? This is. So I get kind of awkward taking videos in churches. I made it pretty brief, but that was the kind of worship they had. They'd have some. The pastor was up there, as well as a number of sort of fairly talented and well-dressed people, and they were singing a harmony with canned music and so forth. The more rural churches used a lot of pianos, and I'm very fond of them, but that was what I saw in this church. Can you advance? Okay, so after that, I was done in Lutsk, and I had visited with them. Well, not quite, no. They took me out to their countryside, out to sort of almost like a reserve, a national forest, and that's where the project we looked at a bunch of projects. I said, look, you guys are handling this fine. I'm not going to do something you can do yourself. So one of my perspectives coming into this was that I was not going to do any projects that they could reasonably do themselves. I was looking for things where it would be a real blessing to show up and help, you know. And so I've been asked, I was in Mexico, and they're like, can you help us with this and get a crew down here to, I don't know, we could pay you to do it for cheaper. You guys need the work. You know, I try not to do what people can do for themselves most of the time without a good reason, but this was where they had a job for me, and so we went out and looked at it. Anyway, as I'm driving along, I saw, that's a schoolhouse. This is the rural area, so there's a lot less money there, a lot less jobs. That's what the houses look like along the gravel roads. One lady actually got off here and got picked up by her husband with a horse-drawn wagon, sort of like the Amish, except got rubber tires. And a lot of the wood poles around there had, I found out these are stork nests. So we all talk about storks. We don't see a lot of storks. You know, they're supposed to bring a baby. Well, storks are in Europe. So this is the first project I agreed to do. This was their dining center where they were using it for retreats and summer activities and summer camps and stuff, but it was being used mostly for refugees right now, and they had a lot of refugee housing there. And they told me that this place, I mean, there were about 50 people eating there in a room that seated 100, but they said in the summer it overflows, and they have over 100 people there, and it only seats 100, so we're going to be building an addition right out this. We'll turn one of these windows into a door, and we'll build a lean-to off of here, and that'll be sort of a drawing right there of the joists and so forth, and the concrete supports coming off the edge of the building. And we'll just extend the dining room size to make it a little bigger. It's a very bite-sized project. There's no plumbing. There's nothing complicated. They even agreed to order a pile of wood from my poor American soul, and we can build with wood. They build everything with concrete and steel and heat with wood, whereas we build with wood and heat with gas, so go figure. But anyway, they said, well, it's not really any more expensive. In fact, it's cheaper. It's just not normally done. We have to order in advance. So I'll be going back there to work on that project. It'll be a fun project. It's very doable. Video. Let's see. Fire it up.
Then sings my soul, my Savior God to...
Okay, so that was, that pastor had already had me speak at a bunch of services, just in sharing. But this time, as we're walking into the building, he says, would you do one of the sermons? Hi. I said, thanks for the warning. I'm like, thanks for the warning. Show him on my phone. He's like, do you not want to do it? I said, no, I'll do it. It's okay. So fortunately, I had a sermon saved in my email for the day when Pastor Ken shows up sick, because I'm an elder. So I keep one in there. So I whipped it out, and I gave it to him. And then he was also, I think he was being extra kind at that time, because he played a whole bunch of traditional American hymns that I knew all of for every song there. I think he did it for me. And so I sang along. But since I was taking the video, I drowned out all the Ukrainians. Anyway, that was at the retreat center as well, where they had doing services for the refugees. All right, end of chapter 1. That was me visiting the churches, organized by Pastor Pablo Marunik. Yeah. Food in the back? I think we can just keep rolling, right? We're having fun. We'll grab snacks at the Q&A time at the end. All right, so off to Lviv, the second place. Jim and Sandy McCann. And we're going to see some videos that are really touching about that. They sure touched me. So their place is called the Joshua House Life Center. If you Google it, you'll find it. They have an active YouTube channel and so forth. This is a mansion in downtown Lviv. God said this is a house for God's children. And so he helped arrange them to be able to buy that house. And they told me a number of times it's probably one of the most coveted houses in the entire region. It's the sort of street where all the retired generals live and so forth. The houses are quite expensive. That's like a 6,000 square foot, like 4-story monstrosity. But they were there, and they had orphans in it. We're going to learn more about that in a minute. At this point, the orphanages has moved out into the mountains, and their kids are running it. So they're mostly hosting refugees right now. They also have a church that meets in there. And then there's a summer camp up in the mountains too. And this is a pair of American missionaries that have been there for about 31 years. So they were there right after the wall fell. And they did not leave during any of these incursions from Russia. A lot of other missionaries left. The American State Department told everyone to leave, and they said, how could we leave? These are my children. Where am I going? Right? So they stayed. So we're going to watch a couple of videos here, and bear with me. Nope, sorry. We're going to look at this first. This was the only place I saw that actually got hit by. This was in Lviv. It was early in the war. A missile came. Drones didn't really come this far. It's a long ways inland. But a missile came and took out this building. All these people died. That's one of their kids there who's with us. And they knew them loosely. It was it was a sad story. They're always a sad story, but this dad, the whole family was downstairs in the basement as they're under air raid sirens and stuff. And the dad finally went up 2 hours later to get water. Well, he was out. Boom. His family's gone. He's out and safe. So, yeah, they were patching it up some, but it had been that way for a couple of years. At this point, there's really no more missiles coming in here. This is all within like 100 miles of the Polish border, and the Polish informally said, look, any missile that comes within 100 miles of my border is an attack on me. We're going to just shoot it down. And so it becomes not very cost effective to send missiles for Poland to destroy them. So they tend to shoot areas that are further east instead. So there's not really a lot of shelling. Nobody tried to kill me. I was advised once I got to Lviv, not in the countryside, to not make it too clear that I was an American. Everyone who knew I was an American was friendly, but there were, I guess, some people who would have taken offense either because they were pro-Russian or because of some of Trump's recent actions. But you'll figure you get hit from both sides. But anyway, here we have a video. And this is just a couple-minute video.
I'm Jim McCann.
And I'm Sandy McCann.
We're missionaries in Ukraine.
And also founders of Joshua House Life Centers.
We both felt that one day we would do missions. After several years of being married, we really got this conviction from God that this is the time, start getting ready. We didn't know where we were going to go or what we were going to do, but we just started praying more. God told us, I've given you the desire of your heart and the direction for your whole life.
Joshua House Life Centers, we named after our son Joshua. I was pregnant, 6 months pregnant with Joshua when we came to Ukraine, and then he died, but it was through the seed of his death that God brought us many children.
One day, we were just really praying, saying, Lord, who are we to these people? Why do you have us in Ukraine? And he told us you're a father to the fatherless and a mother to the motherless. And so he said, if you'll be a mom and dad to them, I'll heal these children and I'll make them whole. And so we understood that once we started allowing children to call us mom and dad, this was a lifetime commitment, and that's what it ended up to be.
This is a real family-oriented ministry. When we came, it was just Jim and I. When we saw these children in Ukraine, our hearts just went out to them, and God put a love in us for them. God brought the childless together with the parentless and made us one big family.
Everybody gets taught about Jesus. We're about making disciples. The ministry really of redemption, putting the lonely into families. A new church is being birthed at this time during the war. We multiplied the centers that we have, the homes that we have, the children that we have, and now we have a new generation of co-laborers that are working with us, and they're taking in orphans.
We have church plants, children's homes, ministry to children, outreach to the poor and the needy. We've also started a unity movement with the pastors and churches, as well as monthly pastors' prayer meetings. Whatever God gives us, we have to hold on to loosely and be willing to let go whenever He wants to take it back from us. God gave us our son, but it was for a season and for a purpose. We know that whatever we own is actually God's, so whatever we have here, it's for God, for His kingdom, for his ministry, and we've been willing to let go of whatever our reputation and our privacy and our homeland, all these things, so that we can have God's best in our lives and his purposes will be accomplished.
In a minute, but let's hit the next video, and then we're just going to watch the first couple minutes of that.
I'm Jim McCann.
This is a long video, so we're just going to watch a couple minutes of this.
Joshua's song.
Meant. Okay, this is her
Oh,
child who died.
Joshua, the Lord God is salvation. He is your salvation and much more. Many have known of you and loved you, though they never saw your face or heard your voice. Oh, how lovely you were. All the desire of our hearts was fulfilled in you. Your spirit was beautiful, with a touch of heaven. You were a reflection of the Spirit of the living God. Joshua, our promised child, God brought you forth to serve him, but you were not chosen to serve him by your own might and skills or by great words of wisdom. Neither would you touch others through a dynamic and charismatic personality. The Lord, having a much purer work, said, "He will serve me in weakness. For by the mouths of infants and babes I have ordained praise. Through your weakness many will praise me." Even now it is happening, for both here and abroad many have come and gathered in the Lord's house to praise the name of Jesus, who loves you so.
All right, I'm going to pause that there. So this is the genesis, in a sense, of their story, and it's a story worth sharing, right? They've been there for 30 years, but basically 3 months after they got there, their child was born, and you can see how much she loves her as she's snuggling her in the videos, a young mom with her child. And 3 weeks later, that child died in considerable pain. And they were wrestling with that, of course, and they were praying about it, and they were at a make or break moment with God. And God, and they chose to keep following God and follow his plan. Now, I grew up reading stories, lots of missionary stories, Gladys Aylward and Hudson Taylor and David Livingstone, biographies and so forth. I read a bunch of the YWAM books, very charismatic stories of like Torches of Joy and stuff. And spending time with Jim and Sandy McCann, to me, felt like I was dropped in the middle of one of those stories. It's a little larger than life for me, honestly, spending time with them. But the Tears of the Saints, so they, we'll see more about this in a minute, but you know, they gave their life back to God, and they started just inviting children from the community into their house until the local parents considered them a safe place to have children, and they started getting orphans off the street. There wasn't really an intact government yet at this point. It was, you know, they had voted to Ukraine had voted to separate from the Soviet Union. Doesn't mean they had a whole intact government. That country's younger than I am, practically speaking, and so there wasn't a lot going on. And since there wasn't a lot of social work and institutions and so forth, they were able to pick kids up off the street. They made trips out into the mountains where the poverty was quite acute and took children out of alcohol-infested homes and brought them to their own home. They ended up with 50 children. So they went from having no children, a barren woman, to becoming, you know, parents to 50 children. 10 of those currently serve in the military. Their kids run the orphanages, which have moved out of the city. They have 69 grandchildren. And they identify a lot of their ministry with the latter parts of Isaiah, which are really appropriate for us as Christians in today's world, where we have a lot of good news to bring. So here's a little video. This one's from back in the 90s, and when they were doing a lot of this.
In the city of Lviv, Ukraine, Jim and Sandy McCann are reaching out in love to the many needy children who live on the streets. In an effort to help restore lives, they have established a home where these children can become part of a loving, caring family like they've never known. For many of the children, the streets are not where their troubles began. What drives them to live a cold, lonely life often starts in the nearby villages in the Carpathian Mountain region, a place not only blanketed with snow and ice, but in sorrow and despair.
In this area and in the mountain areas around here, there's approximately, just in this area, 70 villages. And this is where the street children begin, in the mountains, because here is where the abuse begins at very young ages.
Jim and Sandy can often be found leading a team, including former street children, into the mountain villages to visit the many needy children there, bringing food, clothing, and toys to those who live among such hopeless conditions.
You can see how these children are living in this small one-room home. It's very dirty. Everything is filthy. The toilet is outside. There's no indoor plumbing. They have just this wood stove to heat the home.
Okay, as you can see from the condition of this home, holes in the roof, it's the middle of winter. The temperatures can get below 20 or more. And we have 9 children living inside this home. And as you can see how the home has been destroyed, that's how these lives are destroyed, the children. The parents that are here basically don't even watch over the kids. Both of them are alcoholics. And again, it's the situation of hopelessness that they have in their hearts. There's no employment, there are no jobs, period. So it's very difficult to support people. These children find themselves in extreme conditions that they have no idea how to cope with. And we need to do everything that we can to rescue them. Zirka, by the ripe old age of 3, was already begging on the streets, and she had 2 other sisters, and her mother would leave them, lock them in an apartment. They would have no food, be during the winter time. They'd be standing on the balcony yelling down to people on the streets, please, please come up. And our little Krista was on her way to becoming a forced alcoholic. She would have to drink whole glasses of vodka because her grandmother had it still and they made her drink it. And after that, we had to go on the streets all the time and beg so I could feed my little sister, Kristinka. His head was beaten and smashed into walls and floors by his own mother and father if he would not bring home money. And so he finally ran away and he went to the streets.
Patrick, is this where you slept?
Ola was forced to get up at 4:30 in the morning, work in other people's fields as a slave. She said there was a little girl, and she was so skinny, and her mother would curse at her all the time and beat her. So she went back and she asked the mother, do you want this little girl? And she said, no. You want her? You can have her. And she just threw her away like she was nothing. This is our ministry room, and actually we use this room for our services for the church and also for many other things. And right now what we're using it for is to pack up food for the poor and the needy.
I think a lot because of what they've been through themselves. Now they have a heart of compassion for other people, and they live their lives for.
And this is where the street children begin, in the mountains, because here is where the abuse begins at very young ages. About a year and a half ago, their mother was killed by their father, and these 2 children saw it. They watched the murder. So we're here today to show this family the love of God, bringing them some food and some candy, and also the hope of a home. She's explaining to them the kind of family that she now has. And we're asking Maria, if you had an opportunity to go to this family, would you like to go? And Ola's explaining that she came also from the mountains, and that Would you want to have this kind of family like I have as well? Because the mother is saying to her daughter, Maria, it's up to you what you would want to do. Yeah, he's been on the streets now for 2 years.
Why is that? Why doesn't he want to be in that house?
He said, because nobody will love me. We live in between tears and joy. Somehow God led us to the fountain of tears, of His Spirit, and sorrow for the lost, and especially for children, for us, especially for children. And from that well and fountain of tears, He keeps breathing life through us for others.
Patrick was forced to beg and steal. If he returned home empty-handed, his parents would beat him and bash his head. Zerka and Kristina's mother would leave them alone for days, forcing them to beg just to eat. Kristinka was treated like a slave and sometimes left out in the cold, while her older sister was abused by her father and even chased with a knife. Hala was unloved and covered with lice. Out of desperation, she nearly killed herself at the ripe age of 10. These siblings watched as their mother beat their 3-year-old sister to death. They were forced to work for other families as slaves just to earn money so their father could drink. These are only a few of the hundreds of tragic stories regarding children in Ukraine. They are children who were unloved, abused, and abandoned by the ones who were supposed to have cared the most.
They're in situations that they don't understand. And they don't understand why they never heard love or had an arm around them or kissed or hugged. To them, that's just how life is.
But fortunately, these children were given new hope as Jim and Sandy McCann took them in as their very own. After suffering the tragic death of their 3-week-old infant, Jim and Sandy established the Joshua House and began to reach out to the hurting children of Ukraine. Now, for the first time in their lives, these children began to feel the true love of a parent.
We would kiss their heads full of lice and put our arms around them and tell them we love them, Jesus loves them. And they started really receiving this, we are their children.
We are their family, we are their parents, and so they aren't orphans anymore.
Recently, as an act of thanks to Jim and Sandy, the children wrote and performed for them a song of love for Mom and Dad.
We poured out our lives for these children, and now they are coming back and calling us Mom and Dad.
We are the blessed ones, Sandy and I. We feel like we are the blessed ones. We're the ones that really got blessed through the whole deal.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be good there. So that sort of brings me to tears. I know what it's like when my little girl looks at me and she gives me a big smile and a kiss, and she feels perfectly safe and perfectly loved. And that's what that little girl looked like when she hugged that man. You know, when she hugged Jim McCann there, wrapped her arms around him, she felt perfectly safe. And so the blessing that they were, and how that came out of their loss, story worth sharing. Yeah. So no orphanage in that house anymore, but still a lot of remarkable stories were shared about it from my time there. Some of the ones that seem really dramatic to us, and some that maybe don't seem as dramatic but seem like a big deal to them. I'll just share a couple real quick. One was that he felt a call from God as he was spending his time in prayer. Not only does he spend his mornings in prayer, but he goes away sometimes for a week into the mountains or something. And he was praying, and he felt God calling him to bring the pastors together from all the churches in the city of Lviv. And he did, and he brought them all together, and he brought them in prayer. And the way he tells the story, and I'm sure it won't show up in the history books, that was when the Orange Revolution went through, and the first time in Ukrainian history, really, that a totally fraudulent election was overturned by the will of the people who came especially in Lviv, but also in Kiev, came out into the public square and stayed there for days and weeks. And he had his kids out there, and they were praying and they were praising God during the Orange Revolution. And he believed that collection of pastors and the churches working together on that. He says the bishop of the Orthodox Church stood up and announced, a couple weeks into it, he says, the election has been overturned to all the Christians who were praying there. And then he pointed at them and the children and said, it's because of you and your prayers. So that was a story that he felt was important to share. Another interesting one was the house they were in was, like I said, it was a nice part of town, and it was a former KGB house. And so after the independence, then the KGB wasn't really there anymore, but they sort of turned into the Russian mafia. And so he had bought that house from the people who lived there. They were multiple people living in different parts of the house. He bought it from them one at a time. And because God told him, this house is for my children. And then the KGB showed up at the door, what's left of them, the mafia basically, and said, we want this house back. We'll pay you more than you paid for it. And he said, no, this is God's house. It's for God's children. That's what I was told. And so they came back a week later and they offered him more money and said, look, if you don't take this money, because we want this house, we're going to nail the door shut and we're going to burn it to the ground with you and the kids in it. So, like King Josiah facing the Assyrian army, he got down on his knees. He said, Lord, are you really sure this is your house for your kids? And God says, look, I already told you that. So they waited. And a few days later, a different, larger mafia came in and cleared this mafia out of Lviv and didn't know anything about this house. And they never followed up on it. Nothing ever happened. But, yeah, there were a lot of stories like that. He would always have another one. So hang on a sec. So at this point, there weren't any, and there were their grandkids, they called them, living in there. A few of their families were still there. But mostly they were hosting refugees. While I was there, it was during the Sumy attacks, and another busload came in, and they just needed beds, and there were beds ready for them. They needed supper. They put more soup on, lots of borscht. And so they were just hosting a lot of refugees in that house at this point. Many of them would pass through and keep moving though. This is a brief video of the summer camp that they operate in the mountains. It's not that different from Grand Hill or something like that, although it doesn't run year round. And go ahead and run that for a second. So, yeah, that was fun, huh? So I'm open to ideas on that in the sense that if people, I would be happy to see some connections happen that weren't just about building things materially, but if people had the desire to maybe be a part of that camp or something, or had worked at Cran Hill, were interested in this, they could, we can talk. There's some possibilities, for people to come maybe volunteer or share somewhere. The language barrier is a big problem, but who knows? So we're open to ideas about whether there's a way to partner with that. So this is the second project I agreed to. The upstairs of that mansion, they have some architectural drawings here to turn it into a living space. These are, tables, bathrooms, everything like that. And they would like it turned into living space so they can host more refugees. And the ceilings, that's like 8.5 foot there, so there's lots of room. So I'm going to come back and work on that. It's a daunting project. There's a lot of plumbing involved. The plumbing is different. There's wiring involved. The wiring is different. There will be some local help. There will be some people coming with me. I've talked to some people already who want to come with me. But we're just going to get working on it and see what we can do. So that's the second project I agreed to. And hope to go back to in August and work on that. Or work on both those projects then. Be there for a number of weeks. Bring some people with me. Maybe bring some family. So I went there to go and listen. I didn't have an agenda. I didn't have an organization. I wanted to hear what God was up to. And that's kind of a strange thing to people here. It's also a strange thing to them there. They were I brought encouragement. I'm looking for ways to connect to the churches. Going back in August to work on some projects. I don't have anything set up now, but at some point I will have some sort of account or GoFundMe or something that will help cover my tickets and then allow me to bring some money to pay for materials on some of these projects and so forth. God, bring the help as God sends it with me. And whether there's any connections between the churches or relational volunteering or anything in mind that is, if people want to come and just sit there and someone has it in their heart and they want to come and just, bless some of these children and help out at the camp or meet at the orphanage or teach English. There's lots of opportunities. I know what I'm going to go do, and I'm going to see where it goes from there because I don't know what I'm doing next. But I know what I'm doing after that. But I know what I'm doing next anyway. I'm going back there in August to work on those two projects with a handful of other folks. So we're at the point where we're ready for some questions and some interaction and maybe some snacks if anybody's getting hungry, Zeke. All right. What do we have for questions? Oh, Adam wants to share this. This was given to me by Mark, the young man who was driving the van. This is just the Ukrainian sort of national symbol. And he said, you're doing more for this country, or for this war, he said, really, than anyone by your prayers. And he felt like the prayer support was worth more than the military support. So Adam carries this with him sometimes. So I wanted to share that. So. No. No air raid sirens, no bombs. The country is about the size of Texas. So if you're on one end of it and they're shelling someone on the other side, you won't know. It's a little smaller than Texas. Yeah. It's all 220, and they have multiple breaker boxes, like per floor, but they're made of plastic. They look like VCRs, and rather than one big central one in the basement or something, they're like sub-panels. A lot of it's run, I think, through flex conduit. Their receptacle boxes are square instead of rectangular. It's different. Yeah, Shiloh. Yes. Yes. So that building was the orphanage. Had 50 kids in it at one time. They now have 69 grandkids. As their kids grew up, they passed on the orphanage duties to their children, who now run the orphanages, which they took out of the city. I think it was getting crowded. Maybe it was unsafe, but it's also closer to their area of ministry in the mountains in some ways. So some of their children stay in Lviv with them, and some of their children, run the orphanages in a number of houses out there. But the top floor, we're going to turn it into more living space, basically. instead of attic space. I don't know yet. I could be maybe 4 weeks. Depends how many people come with me and so forth. So, yeah. The children? Yeah. So I know their family get-togethers are very large. Most of their children are employed. They said about 10 of them are now men are serving in the military. So I think only maybe 4 or 5, families stayed close and involved and are part of the orphanage and the house in Lviv. The rest of them have gone to college or gone into the workforce and so forth. Entered the world, yes. One remarkable thing about that too, and it's an important lesson for us, is because there's a biblical corollary, is that they told their kids, they would send their kids to school, they said, don't tell them you're from an orphanage. Tell them, because they would get teased, for being from an orphanage. They would say, look, you tell them, I have a mom and dad. And they did. So biblically as well, we are told we are not orphans, but we are fully adopted heirs of Christ. Important touch there. I don't know how. I know, emotional pain, trauma, these are real things. But not only the videos, but everyone I met, and you saw all the abuse that was listed there. You probably were able to hear in your mind all the abuse that wasn't described and the sexual abuse and so forth that these kids went through. Everyone I interacted with was well-adjusted, kind, friendly, eye contact, gone on to healthy marriages and so forth. So the time they spent in prayer and the time they invested in those children and the relationships between those children and God and the relationships between those children and the children in a community of 50 kids, you can't like one-on-one parent when you have 50 kids very much, worked out well for them. And everything I saw turned out fine, yeah. I'm sure there's some hard stories in there, but I didn't hear them yet, so. Yeah, the dining room, that's about 40 by 15 feet. Everything there is also in meters, so it's always, you got to work with steel and concrete, work in meters, steel framing, different plumbing, everything. It's all different. So it's not that I can't adapt, but it will take a little time to get used to the system. It won't be like walking in off one of my job sites. Anyway, it's about, I think, what was it, 5 meters by 11 meters or something, so 55 feet by 15 feet. And it's pretty straightforward. Maybe not as many as I want. I know on the church project at the retreat, I'll have one guy who spoke some English be working directly with me on the whole project, and that'll be helpful. And they said that one won't end up inspected at all. It's out in the middle of nowhere or something. The other one is a bit more daunting. Someone's father-in-law is an electrician who likes to not work too much, so he'll come and tell us how to do it, hopefully. And I've been Googling, even their toilets work different than ours. Did you know that there are different ways toilets can work? I did not. We have a siphonic toilet, and they have just a bowl-based toilet. Go figure. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Go ahead. Laura.
When you start to build, do you have to get permits to do this before you build? Does that take a long time?
Like I said, the church one isn't permitted. They're just going to build it. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a town of like 30 houses or something, and they said they would take care of that, but it wouldn't happen. The other one, they said it will be inspected, and it will probably be inspected at a higher standard because they are not Ukrainian. Most of the buildings around there are in poor, this would be in better repair than any of the ones around them, but they would still be held to a higher standard being foreigners. How to pass that, I don't know, but at least my name's not on it and my paycheck isn't tied to it. But hopefully they bring me help that can help me pass that and so forth and talk me through some of that. I've asked them to provide me with people who can do that. So. Yeah.
So there are supplies available for building.
Yeah, that was a concern of mine as well. Yes. The supplies necessary for renovating are all available at their equivalent of the building supply stores and Home Depots. Most of that's in stock. The materials for building the addition, which is wood, all has to be custom ordered, but I gave a full list before I went of materials. And so they'll have that waiting for me when I get there. And if they don't, I won't work on that project. So, or we'll adapt and build it out of concrete and steel. So the supply chains seem to be fairly intact, and the prices weren't too high. Labor is one of the main problems. That's one of the reasons I went, is if a quarter of your men from 25 to 60 are serving on the front line, a number of others have skipped the country, and maybe you've pulled especially from the blue collar and working class, whereas into the military versus the college educated. There's a lack of blue collar workers, to be sure. And I spoke with there was a crew there working in the church one time. I said, "How hard is it to find help?" He said, "It's hard." He says, "You can't find good help. And everything, all the labor costs more because there's just not enough of it." So that's part of why I'm stepping in and bringing help. Pardon? Well, this was exciting for me. It was cool to be able to go and do this, to hear their stories, to encourage them and to be encouraged by them. And I just want to kind of reiterate that some of the most important work that is done, the most important work that is done is not with a swinging hammer. God can build anything, but it's the relationships He really desires. I am not exactly sure what to pray for right now, other than I know I'm going. I'm not too concerned about finding the financial resources to do it or carving the time out of my schedule. God will provide a way for that. But if there's more ways to connect with the Joshua Life Ministries, more ways to be a blessing in either of the places I visited, or other doors that I haven't even visited yet that I might see on my second trip. I haven't seen them. If there's people who want to come and go to Ukraine with me, it's like I said, it's not physically dangerous at this point, who feel that call, and there's chances to minister and connect and do God's work, and then I don't know what those are yet exactly. And I'm open to ideas, and I'm open to prayer. So I'd say just pray for God to do what He loves doing anyway, and to provide the direction and the openings if there's more to pursue here. Yeah.
You had mentioned to me, and you might want to share that Jim McCann thought that you were in.
Oh, I did not share that story. Yes. So when I first called Jim and Sandy, Jim, I got the number from my insurance agent. I cold called him, and I sent him an email with my number, and I listed my skill set in there. And then as soon as I called him. He said, "We've been praying for you for 3 years. We needed someone with these skill sets, and you lined up exactly." And that initial conversation we had was just really rich and a real blessing, and it was very much a sense of, he never asked me once what denomination you're from. We were much more focused on the work to do and on God's work in our hearts and our lives. And a recurring theme in my conversations with the McCanns was that they realized very much that they're getting toward the end of their life, and that they had been blessed to be able to be a part of these ministries and to love all these children, but they were looking for ways to hand things off. In fact, I think they were kind of hoping I was part of that, and I was not at all convinced I was part of being handed off anything too. Although I would like to help them hand it off to their kids who are there, and maybe provide some physical, material support to get some of those projects that would be impediments to carrying on the mission for the next generation. But they had a strong sense of the next generation stepping up. Yeah. Yeah, or that I get really good at learning Ukrainian on YouTube. Yeah.
What was the church like at this place?
Like most churches that we talk to, like they are just desiring for that outreach to be fruitful. as they minister to all these people. They have some youth are asking questions. The older people that are staying in their facilities or are passing through their lines, they just want to bring the gospel to those people. It seems like an opportune time in the country's history to them. We're done? I think if there's no more questions, we're gonna. What kind of support? God has blessed me with a lot of people who are sort of asking me that question. What do you need? At some point, I will. Actually, I would. At this point, I have not run my ministry here through this church in any way. I've just come here to share with you about it, and I'm not sure that I will. So at some point, maybe if someone who's not related to me wants to come and open a little account and collect donations for me, so it's not in my hands, and then be able to help move money to someone like you would be great, Ellie. Who could do something like that, just for that transparency and the disconnect, to allow me to both pay for the tickets of any volunteers coming with me and myself, and also to send money to be used for paying for some of these materials and projects. That'd be a blessing. So someone to do that would be great. And I'm praying that God sends some people to come with me, and I've talked to a handful already. And it's not like I'm trying to organize, a painting trip to Mexico where we're just opening the door to youth group. But if there are people that God moves in their heart, and if they have good physical skill sets, that's great. And also some people who maybe have some more relational skills. Hey, God's putting together a team. I'm just on it.
You wouldn't have to go for the whole thing.
No, we're all adults. You can fly in and fly out on your own time. So, yeah. Thank you so much for coming out here, for hearing me, for praying for me, for encouraging me to share. Thank you. I felt propelled, not just impelled, but propelled by all the prayer that was coming behind me as I went. There were so many people just bringing me that encouragement and that prayer. If this is all that happened from it, and that's all that we see, then maybe that's God's plan. And if something bigger comes out of it, then we'll find that out too. And you guys can be listening for that as well as myself. I encourage you to check out more if you're curious about the Joshua House Life Center online. It's a remarkable ministry that other people, churches in America, have supported for many years. And I will, as I get closer, I'll put this video up, but we'll probably share more on the Facebook page. And if you have advice or thoughts or encouragement or words for me, come find me. If you have someone who you think would be a good fit and they might want to go, let me know. So we'll go back again in mid-August. So early to late August, something in there. So, all right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, you have been sending people since Paul and well before, like Jonah. Lord, you desire that none should perish apart from knowing you, and so you send people all over. I am so honored that you sent me on this little jaunt, and that, Lord, we pray that you would open whatever doors and windows that we haven't noticed yet, as well as the ones we have, to create connections between your church spread across the whole world. We pray for the suffering, for the older folk lost their homes, their families have moved away, they've lost friends maybe to explosions, and the loneliness and the fear they suffer from. We pray for the children, the orphans of yesteryear and the orphans of now, and those who just so much fear and pain and things blown up around them, hunger sometimes, mostly not knowing. We pray that they would get to know you and that these ministries would be fruitful. We pray for the adults as well. Lord, bring this country to Jesus during this time of trial and fear. Bring this country to really know you and to step apart from the false faith of of the East and the empty atheism of the West, and instead to know you personally. Bring a revival to this country at this time. I pray that you would pave a path forward to the group that heads out in August. You would lay clear the tickets, the work, the materials, the permits, and the skills, the relationships, and the translators, whatever is needed. Lord, I thank you for your people here in this building and those who couldn't make it, that have brought their encouragement and their prayer before you. Your Spirit is alive and well and moving. Move among us all, we pray. Amen.